you. Thank you. Thank you. Somebody remind me. I am more than happy to record it. And yes, I did just start the recording now. So
Thank you.
luckily I didn't get too far into the lecture. So the 6 nutrients we're going to be studying, the first 3 are macronutrients: carbs, fat, and protein. And what these 3 that I'm highlighting here in red, they have calories. That's why they're called the macronutrients. These are the ones that give us energy and have calories. Okay? The other 3 on here are called micronutrients. I'll put them here kind of like in green. So these are the micronutrients. They do not have calories. They do not give us energy, but they're essential to have in the body so that we're healthy and we function correctly. So these are the 6 nutrients we're going to cover. Today we're doing carbohydrates. For each of these nutrients, you're going to have to be able to know the questions that I have here, the 7 questions I have here listed. So it might be a good idea to jot this down. I do have a copy of what you're seeing on your screen in the learning module. It's one of the last links in the learning module, and it is called What You Should Know for the 6 Nutrients, if you'd rather just refer to it there. So number 1, what is the nutrient made of? Okay, you're going to have to know that. And I always present that as the first thing in my PowerPoint. We'll get to that in a moment. Number 2, what is the function of the nutrient? And really, that tells us why we need to eat it. Why do I have to eat carbohydrates? And then the answer really is the function of it. Why does the human body need that? Okay. Number 3, how many calories in 1 gram of the nutrient? Now, if you remember what I said, the first 3 give us calories: carbs, fat, protein. The micronutrients do not. So we don't have to worry about that question for vitamins, minerals, and water. Okay. I don't know if I'm going too fast or too slow, but I'll just take a quick break here. Does anybody have questions so far?
So right now you're just going over what we need to know.
Correct. What you need to know for all 6 nutrients. And I'm only going to go over this today. I'm not going to go over it, next week when we do fat and protein, or the following week when we do vitamin or mineral. I'll assume that for all 6 nutrients, you will know this. Okay. And it'll take us about a month to get to that point.
So what could I name my title for my notes?
Probably what I titled the document here: what you should know for each of the 6 nutrients.
Okay.
Right, or 7 things to know about the nutrients. Okay. And these are the kind of questions that the quizzes will be about, that we're going to really focus on in class. But I'm going to tell you a lot more. Okay. So in terms of memorizing it, you don't have to memorize every single thing I say. But these 7 things, I would say, yes, you should memorize it. All right, we'll go to number 4, the percentage of our diet that should consist of the nutrient. Okay. And I'll give you a quick preview here. About 60% of our diet should be carbs, about 20% of our diet should be fat, and about 20% of our diet should be protein. So I like easy math, and I like to only remember one number. In your book, they will give you a range. For carbs, it's 45 to 65%. It's too much for my brain to memorize, so I only narrow it down to one number. I say about 60%. And when I say this, about 60%, plus or minus 10, you'll be fine. Plus or minus, 5 on fat and protein, you'll be fine. All right. Now, the micronutrients, these are going to be measured in units. Sometimes they're milligrams, sometimes micrograms, sometimes international units. So we don't really give a percentage for vitamins, mineral, and water, but we're just going to measure them in units. How many vitamin A should I get? How much calcium should I get? And certain things like that. Okay. Now, as far as memorizing each micronutrient, I don't think you have to memorize it, but you have to know where to find it. And I have plenty of places in my notes and online where you could look that up. Like how many international units of vitamin D we need per day. Be able to look it up. Okay. All right. And this will make a lot of sense once we get through today's lesson on carbs, all 7 of these. The different types of each nutrient. There are different types of carbohydrates. We will study what those types are. And when we learn what different types there are, we'll know which ones are the healthiest ones to eat and which ones do we really have to kind of moderate or not eat as much of. So there are 2 different types of carbs. We will study those as we get through our lesson today. Then the 6 is examples of each nutrient in our diet. So I'll ask you, what are some examples of a specific type of carbohydrate you ate, within the last 24 hours? And you'll be able to recall foods. You'll be able to say, like, today I ate an orange. Yesterday for dinner, I ate Brussels sprouts. Okay. So it's just the name of foods. I'll put that. And then lastly, problems. What if I have too much or too little of this nutrient? What would happen to my health and wellness? So what would happen if I ate too many carbs? What would happen if I didn't eat enough carbs? What would happen to my body? And we will cover that as well. Okay. So we'll know these 7 questions for each of these 6 nutrients. All right. And just for today, there may be 1 or 2 extra per nutrient. So for today, for carbs, we're also going to have to know by the end of this week a little bit about fiber, which is a unique carbohydrate. And I also want you to know what I call the blood glucose story. Now, we will cover the blood glucose story on Thursday. And make sure you come ready and paying attention on Thursday, because this is really, I believe, one of the most important lessons of the whole course, the blood glucose story. How much glucose is in your bloodstream? How did it get there? How does it get out of there? It really dictates our health and our weight. So you'll want to pay attention to that. And again, we'll get to that Thursday. So in addition, so think of it this way, for carbohydrates, number 1, what is a carb made of? Number 2, what is the function of a carbohydrate? Which is why we have to eat it. Number 3, how many calories in a carb? Number 4, what percentage of our diet should be a carb? Number 5, what are some types of carbohydrates? And 6, what are examples of carbs that I eat? And then finally, what is the problem of having too much carbs or not enough carbs in my diet? All right. And then we'll talk a bit more about fiber and the blood glucose story. All right. Questions? That was a lot just to learn what we have to learn. All right. I want to show you one other item before we get to the PowerPoint. And it's my instructor notes. Okay, for the instructor notes, each nutrient I have 1 page of notes for. And these notes are in the learning module. I'm not going to read over them today in class because everything on these notes is in the PowerPoint. What you could do, and I would highly encourage you to do this, is print that out. Print out my notes for carbs. It would be called instructor notes carbohydrate. And then next week we'll do instructor notes fat, instructor notes protein. I'll show you where they are. But the answer to those 7 questions is pretty much in these notes. And it's just a simple 1-page document that I put everything in a condensed form so you can find it all on 1 sheet. Okay. So these are the instructor notes, and you can see all the answers are there. I'm going to show you really quickly where to find this in Blackboard. So again, let me show you my screen. If I go to Blackboard and I go to Learning Modules, I go into Learning Module 1. And here's the student view. You will see instructor notes CHO. That's the last document I showed you on my screen. That one-page summary of what 7 questions were, the answer to those 7 questions. You'll see my PowerPoint, which I'm going to do in class today. Remember, the instructor presentation is my PowerPoint with my voice. We'll look at a couple of videos in class. I'm actually going to email you one that you need to view for homework. It's a 10-minute video. And a couple of websites. Remember what I said, what you should know about the nutrients is right here. It's actually called carbs. What you should know, it's the 7 questions. Then your discussion question and quiz are due Friday. Okay. So I just want to make sure you know where everything is. All the learning modules will be set up this way. There'll be notes, PowerPoint. If I have a presentation, it'll be next, then videos and net websites, and then discussion and quiz. All right. Any questions? All right. Glad to see. A lot of you did come after attendance, so I do need you to stick around later when I ask you about attendance. So let's get going. Corn. It could be that this is the beginning of a green bean plant, right? So if it's looking like a plant or something that came right off the plant, that's what we call whole natural foods. Those are the healthiest type of carbs, all right? And we're eating the energy that this plant pretty much produced for itself. So remember that when you think of carbs. I think a lot of people forget that fruit and vegetable are carbohydrates. They're predominantly carbohydrates. When people think of carbs, I think most people, what would you think of if I said carbs? What kind of foods would you guys think of?
Breads, grains.
Mm-hmm. Breads and grains. What else? Anybody else?
Potatoes, rice.
Potatoes and rice. Maybe pasta. That's what people think of carbs, right? And it doesn't really resemble what this plant looks like. Although the carbs that you guys are talking about, which would be like pasta and bread, they came from something that looked like this, but they were changed and altered. They were processed to make it look like a loaf of bread, to make it look like pasta. Now, I can't say that all of those breads and pastas are bad. We could actually use the entire plant to make something look like a loaf of bread, and you'll get to that when we talk about whole grains versus processed grains in a moment. But I think people forget when they say, oh, carbs are bad, they forget that fruit and vegetable are predominantly carbohydrates, and that's why they're so important to eat. So the function, I think I skipped one. The function of a carbohydrate is that it's the primary energy source of the human body. Think of it as your gasoline. Your body wants to use carbohydrates for fuel. All right. In fact, your brain can only use carbohydrates, nothing else. So if we don't have enough carbs, one of the first things to stop working is our brain, and brain cells may die if we don't have enough carbs. So we don't want that to happen. But your working muscles use 2 different kinds of nutrient for fuel. One is carbohydrate and the other is fat, believe it or not. So your working muscles will use a combination of carbs and fat when they work. When you're walking, riding a bike, or swimming, when you're doing any chore. Your brain only uses carbs, but the muscles use carbs and fat. Depending on the intensity of activity, will dictate how many carbs are used for fuel. And you can see in this image, which is in your textbook, if we're doing low intensity activity, just walking, we're using mostly fat for fuel and a little percentage of carbs. You see that? All out high intense activity is predominantly fueled by carbohydrates. And I would even argue maybe even more than this percentage. But if you're doing a 1 rep max, a slam dunk, sprinting as fast as you can, what else? Tackling in football. Most of your energy is coming from carbohydrates, very little from fat. But do note that our body will burn these 2 nutrients for fuel. Nowhere on here does it say protein. Protein is something completely different. We do not use protein for energy. We use protein to build and repair tissues of the body. We're talking energy. First, think of carbs. Second, think of fat. Okay? All right, and we saw our little picture of our plant. Now let's talk about calories. If we weighed out 1 gram of a carbohydrate, it would equate to 4 calories. And this is how they get calories per serving. Like if you were to buy a cereal box and it said 100 calories per serving. Well, how the heck did they figure that out? They weigh the product and they determine how much of the product is carbs and they multiply that by 4. So I'll ask you a simple question. If I said I had a food that had 100 grams of carbohydrate in that, how many calories would that be? 100 grams of carbs. Maybe it's a brownie or something, or a huge chocolate chip cookie. How many calories would a 100-gram chocolate chip cookie be?
4. I'm not sure.
100 grams.
No, you said 100 grams, so it would be
400.
400.
I heard a couple of people talking at the same time, so I don't know if you got the right answer. The answer is 400. Did somebody write that in the chat room? It is 400 because what I do is I multiply 100 grams times 4. Okay, and that's how I got my 400. This is a preview. When we do talk metabolism, we will do math in terms of calories, so you'll know how to do that, and I could refresh you when it's time to do that when we talk about weight control and stuff. Okay, so about 60% of our diet should be carbohydrates, and I think that shocks a lot of people. Most people come into my class saying much less than that, but it is a little bit more than half of everything you eat should be a carb. When we think about fruit and vegetables, now it makes sense. Believe it or not, most nutritionists and doctors say half of the food we eat should be fruit and vegetable. All right. We also need grains. So when we talk about the primary macronutrients, let's go with 60% carbs, and then we'll do 20% fat, 20% protein. We notice that adds up to 100%, or all the food you eat in a day. The textbook will say 45 to 65% of your diet should be carbs. But again, I just memorized the one number because it makes it simpler for me. Okay? There are 2 types. Remember that next question, how many types of carbs we have? The first type is called a simple carbohydrate, and the second type is called a complex carbohydrate. So 2 types. All right? And I'm going to get back to that in a minute. For each type, there are kind of a breakout type underneath that. But what I really need you to focus on is that if I ask you what are the 2 types of carbs, you're going to say simple carb, complex carb. All right? Let's just delve a little deeper into these simple carbs. The first simple carb is called a monosaccharide. What does the word mono, the prefix mono, mean?
1, singular.
One.
Correct. One. Saccharide, this word really means sugar or carbohydrate. So they're synonyms for each other. If I said carbohydrates or sugar or saccharide, it's all the same thing. I'll try to keep my words, keep my Q word being a carbohydrate. But if you hear me say sugar, it is a carbohydrate. Okay. So the first simple carbohydrate is monosaccharide. 1 sugar. That's what this means. 1 sugar, 1 carbohydrate. So there's only one molecule. There's three kinds of monosaccharide: glucose, fructose, and galactose. Now, this is a final exam question. I think it's an exam question, excuse me, a quiz question as well. What is the simplest form of a carbohydrate? And your answer is right here, glucose. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. Glucose is the simplest carbohydrate. What that means is, no matter what kind of carb you eat, pizza, Twinkies, strawberries, broccoli, no matter what, it all will break down into glucose, and your body uses glucose for energy, okay? So this is the form of carbohydrate that we use for energy. Our brain uses it, our muscles use that. And on Thursday, we're going to investigate the blood glucose story. Okay, the blood glucose story. And that is the story of how does our body use energy? Where does it get energy? How does it use it? And that's why we use that word glucose, all right? Two other monosaccharides, fructose and galactose. What does this fructose look like to you? What kind of food do you eat every day that's spelled similar to F-R-U-T?
A lot of juices, fruit snacks, high fructose
Yep.
corn syrup is where I'm used to seeing that word.
Yeah. Well, it's fruit. That's what I want you to think of, is the fruit. This monosaccharide is in fruit. So it's in your strawberry, it is in your orange, and it is in things that we make with those: orange juice, fruit snacks. The one thing you mentioned, a high fructose corn syrup, that's a processed, and you know this, I'm sure, that's a processed sugar. They do use corn to create it, but they do add some chemicals to it. And I don't know why they chose the word fructose to label that type of syrupy or sugar that they're creating, other than the high fructose corn syrup, it's a lot sweeter in taste than a real piece of fruit. And I think the people who process it and make it want people to know that that's a very sweet thing, right? It's a sweet food. It's resembling fructose. But for purposes here, know that fructose is in fruit. So we know that there are simple carbs in fruit, okay? Now we also have something called galactose. Now, if I took off the G and the A, I would have this word lactose. What does that word ring a bell with in your mind? Where did you hear the word lactose before?
Milk sugar?
Dairy.
Right, milk sugar. So we now know that there are simple carbohydrates in fruit and in dairy, which is milk, right? So I think most people, when they think of a simple carbohydrate, they think candy and syrup and sugar and maple syrup. But realize there are simple carbs in fruit and dairy as well. When we get to the next slide is where we'll get a lot of these sugars. So disaccharide. So the first type of a carbohydrate is simple carbs. And there's two kinds of simple carbs: monosaccharide and disaccharide. Now we're in the disaccharide. What does the prefix di mean? What do you think? Di, what does that mean? It's got to be somebody that took chemistry in here. Mono
Two.
means one. Yeah, di means two. Yeah, you guys knew that. You guys knew that. So now we have two sugars, two saccharides, or two carbohydrate molecules. So there's two molecules linked together with one bond. The different kinds of disaccharide are sucrose, lactose, maltose. Sucrose is table sugar. If you were to add a little sugar to your tea or coffee, if you were to make a cake and you wanted to put some sugar in it, that's sucrose. It's the table sugar, okay? So you can impress your friends. You could say, would you like some sucrose in your coffee? Then the next one we have, again, our dairy sugar. And then the last one is in maltose. It is We find this in like alcoholic beverages along with the alcohol. A lot of times they will put carbohydrate from a malt. It's a grain, and they use that to put it in that grain in alcoholic beverages. So we have covered the simple carbs. Monosaccharide. Whoops. Now, how did that get to the end? Oops, I just wanted to show you this. We've covered monosaccharides, one sugar, one carb, and then our disaccharide. Okay?
You
Now
said
there,
the simple carbohydrate.
both of these are simple carbs. Is that what your question was?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I labeled it correctly in my notes. Thank you.
Yeah, monosaccharide and disaccharide are both simple. And this is why they're simple. The monosaccharide only has one molecule, absolutely no bonds. The disaccharide has two molecules with one bond. As soon as we eat a simple carb, we use this energy immediately. When a food goes into our system, we have to break bonds down before we can use that food for energy. Well, monosaccharide doesn't even have a bond, so we use it immediately within milliseconds of eating it. A disaccharide, it takes a fraction of a second to break that bond, and we can use it right away. So simple carbs we use for energy fast, immediately. So think about different kind of simple carbohydrates you guys eat. As soon as you eat these simple carbs, you can use them for energy immediately. Now, the blood glucose story will tell us on Thursday, if we don't use it for energy immediately, we have to store it for later. We have to store it somewhere in the body for later. So if we eat a lot of simple carbs, we either got to use it up right away by doing some walking, sports, chores, move around, or we're going to end up storing that in the body. It could be stored as, and you'll learn more about this Thursday, but it could be stored in your muscle or in your fat. And this is kind of one of the issues. If people are eating all simple carbs, you could start putting on body fat. But you'll learn more about that Thursday. But these are the simple carbs. Now, in contrast to that, if we go to the complex carbohydrates, they're called polysaccharides. Poly means a lot of sugars. These are why it's called complex. There are hundreds, sometimes thousands of bonds between each molecule of a complex carbohydrate. So before we can use this, we have to break a bond, use the carbohydrate molecule. Break a bond, use the carbohydrate molecule. I'm going to bore you. Break a bond, use the carbohydrate molecule. So it gives us energy for longer periods of time. Complex carbs will give you guys energy for 2-3 hours. Whereas those simple carbs, you eat it, you get the energy immediately, it's gone within minutes. The source of energy is gone really within I would say maybe about 15 minutes, 20 minutes. You either used it or it's in storage. With a complex carb, we call it the trickle effect. Let's say we had a complex carbohydrate with 1,000 bonds. We break one, use it. Break one, use it. That's going to take me 2 hours to get through that, right? Break one, use it. 2-3 hours. So they're a longer lasting form of energy. And these are the ones that we really consider the healthiest, are complex carbs. Now let's look at these. Glycogen is stored carbohydrates in an animal. You don't eat glycogen. This is, remember when I said we could store excess carbs if we have too many? We will store them as muscle glycogen, but any animal has this. Any animal that you eat. If it was a cow, if it was a pig, it has muscle glycogen. So think of glycogen as stored carbohydrates, and that typically is in your muscle. So this really isn't a food. The next two are. When we eat a complex carb, it typically is starch. Starch is what is found in your vegetables and your grains. So some examples might be your broccoli, your Brussels sprouts, wheat, barley, quinoa, oats. This is all starch. That's the name of the complex carbohydrate that we're eating if we eat a grain or a vegetable. Okay? This is starch is the one that has the 4 calories per gram, right? The reason I say that is fiber is in these plants that we eat, but fiber, it's unique because it really doesn't have those 4 calories. Fiber is the fibrous roughage that we're getting off of a plant. Outer coatings, peels, like a peel of the corn. It might be in celery. It might be those stringy parts that are in the celery. In an apple, it's the outer peel of the apple. There is some fiber within the fruit and vegetables as well, but fiber has no calories. And what I think of it as is the way it goes in your mouth is the way it comes out. We don't really digest it. We don't use it for calories. It just kind of pushes things through. It does help prevent 20 plus diseases. So we have to eat it. And that, guys, is the complex carbs. We have stored carbohydrate in muscle, which is called glycogen. We have the carbohydrate, the complex carbohydrate we eat, which is called starch. And then we have fiber. Now, the thing with fiber is it's not only in whole grains and vegetables. It is also in fruit. It's in beans. It's in nuts and seeds. So it's not only in the complex carbohydrates. Okay, it is a complex carb, but we also find it in foods that have different nutrients as well. Let me finish up, and then I'm going to ask you guys some examples to make sure you understand what I'm saying. All right, carbohydrates. The complex carbs are the healthiest form to eat. They give us long-lasting energy. We call it the trickle effect. We can eat a bowl of whole oats, oatmeal. We can eat a bowl of barley. We can eat a vegetable, and that will give us energy for several hours because it trickles into the bloodstream. A little bit of glucose at a time will be broken off. A little bit of molecules at a time will be broken off and trickle into that bloodstream. Okay, this is complex. Think of it. Complex is hard. It takes a long time. Simple is easy. It gets in fast. And we call those really the healthiest kind. Let me go back. The healthiest kind to eat. Because if we overload on the simple carbs, we're going to have to use it immediately or store it. We really don't get that issue with complex carbs. Because it comes into the bloodstream so slowly, we only get a tiny bit at a time. We don't really have to worry much about storing it because we don't have extra. We might get 4 or 5 molecules every 10 minutes. We use those when we're talking and walking and doing chores, and there's not extra. There's not extra. Okay. So saccharides, think of it as sugar or carbohydrates. 60% of our diet should come from carbohydrates, mostly the complex ones, such as whole grains and vegetables, with a few simple carbohydrates like fruit and dairy. Okay. Now, I'm just going to backtrack for a minute before we talk about something that's whole grain or processed grain. Before we get into that, I want just to review and give you guys some time to talk too. So if I get to this slide, let's think about those 7 questions that I presented at the beginning of class. First one, what is the function of a carbohydrate? Who can answer that? Just verbally say it out loud. What's the function of a carb?
It's our primary energy source.
Very good. It is the primary energy source of the body. What kind of nutrient does your brain use for fuel? It's okay to guess too.
Carbs.
Only carbs, only glucose. The only thing your brain can use for fuel is glucose, the simplest form of sugar, glucose. What were the 2 nutrients your muscles could use for fuel?
Fat and carbs.
Very good. Fat and carbs. And depending on how hard the work is, will dictate whether you use more carb or more fat. If we're sleeping, we're using mostly fat because it's a low intensity activity. If we're shoveling snow today, supposedly it's really heavy and you would be doing a high intensity activity if you were shoveling pretty quickly, we'd probably use mostly carbs. Okay. Higher intensity, we rely more on carbs. All right. Does someone have a question?
Yeah, it's me, Talea. I just had a question about, in regards to the difference between calories and carbs, are they kind of like, do they correlate? Are they interchangeable when it comes to energy? Or is when it comes to like, sorry.
No, you actually broke out. Your mic broke out in the middle of what you were saying. What is the difference between what in carbohydrates?
Calories and carbohydrates
Calories.
in regards to energy.
Okay, so all three different type of nutrient will all have calories. We do have calories in carbohydrates, 4 grams per 4 calories per gram.
Okay.
Fat actually has 9 calories per gram, and protein has 4 calories per gram. So any one of these nutrients will have calories. Your body will take those calories and turn it into energy. Okay.
Okay.
So we could definitely think of carbs as energy because they give us the energy. The carbs is like the noun, the object that gives our body calories. We also get calories from fat, and we also get calories from protein. Okay, does that help?
Yeah, I was just really wanting to know, because I remember a long time ago in school, back when they were kind of starting to teach about how to read the nutrition facts on the back of the box, would break down the different things, and they made it seem like, ooh, calories is like amazing, it has the energy, and they kind of belittled carbohydrates. So it's really, really good to know now that, like, the importance of carbohydrates.
Yeah. So when we listen to, sometimes you might be listening to things we hear in public, or maybe some information from people that don't know nutrition very well. They do give some nutrients a bad name, but carbs, we couldn't live without them because they are, go back to the function, they're the primary source of energy for the human body. It's the only thing your brain uses. If you ever got up really quickly out of bed and felt lightheaded, okay, one of two things, well, it could be two things really. You either don't have energy for your brain, and I've seen people faint who have gone long periods of time without eating, or you might not have enough water. That does cause fainting as well. So anyway, but if we went really long time without eating carbohydrates, eventually we'd run out of them in the body, and unfortunately you would die. Your brain cells start dying if you don't have carbohydrates. And I'll give you an everyday example that happens to me probably once a year. I do run the fitness center at Triton College. We're trying to reopen during this pandemic, but I'll be going down there in the morning, maybe 8, 9 in the morning, and I see somebody working out and they fainted. And as soon as they hit the ground, they usually wake up, and I said, "What happened?" "Oh, I fainted. I don't know what happened." "Did you eat breakfast?" No, they didn't eat breakfast, and they started working out. So what's happening is the brain shut down. The brain didn't have fuel, it didn't have energy, which we got from carbs. So it kind of said, "I'm going to shut down." Luckily they kind of, came to. Nobody seriously got hurt. But if we run out of carbs, our brain will suffer. So we definitely need them to fuel the central nervous system. Not to mention, more than half the time, your muscles burn carbs for energy. Okay. I should put it this way. Where are your muscles getting their energy from? More than half the day, they're using carbohydrates for their energy. Okay. All right. So we know so far that carbs gives us energy. The answer's on the screen. How much of my diet should come from a carbohydrate? You guys can go ahead and say it. The answer's on the screen.
60%.
Yeah, 60%. But realize, plus or minus 10, really. The book's going to say 45 to 65. I truly think active people need 60 because you're active. You're doing stuff, you need energy. Think of it as, what are the great foods I could eat to give my body the energy it needs? Okay. So then we say there's two types of carbohydrates. The first type is simple. The second type is complex. Two types. Now, the primary difference of the types is how quickly energy will get into my body, and will I need to store this energy? Simple carbs get in your body fast, immediately. If you ate, I'm just going to stick with my fruit vegetable thing. If you ate a banana that contained 60 calories, all of those calories would get into your body immediately, and you would either use them for energy or store them. Some of it might be able to be stored as muscle glycogen, some of it is body fat. Now, if I eat a complex carb, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, it could also be oats, and say it was worth same 60 calories, it takes a long time for those 60 calories to get into the body. Maybe you're only going to get 1 calorie every 2 minutes. Okay, so it's trickling in slowly. And what good this does is it prevents us from getting this huge rush of glucose all at once and then having to store it. There's so much glucose, it really is about 120 level of glucose that your blood could take when we talk about the blood glucose story. Once you get more than 120 parts of glucose in the body, you have to store it or you'll be very sick. So do we want it all coming in at once with simple carbs? Or do we want it coming a little bit at a time so we don't end up storing it as body fat?
A little bit at a time.
Right, a little bit at a time. Don't always think simple carbs are bad. Some people, I kind of exaggerate my lesson, skewed a bit toward we should be eating complex carbs, which we should. But there is a time and place you need simple carbs. For instance, if you were doing a long workout or you were an athlete and halftime, you were flat out at energy, I would tell you drink some milk or have a couple pieces of fruit, because I want that energy quick into your body so you could keep working out. And that really is why they have simple carbs in Gatorade, right? Gatorade was developed to drink during football games. Guys are out there playing football, they're running low on energy, drink the energy. They're drinking simple carb. They could keep playing. Now, we don't want to do that if we're not active, though, because if we're throwing in the simple carbs, two things could happen. Number one, we're going to end up having to store it if we're not active. But it's really, really easy to overeat simple carbs. Now, I focused on the healthy ones, fruit and dairy. But simple carbs, don't forget, simple carbs are this sucrose, table sugar. And when we start reading labels, you wouldn't believe how much sugar is in a can of pop, how much sucrose is in pop, how much sucrose is in cake, cookies. Sucrose is in everything, believe it or not. I have found it in ketchup, canned soups. I found it in bacon. They put sucrose in everything, and it's sweet, so we like it, right? It tastes good, but it's easy to overeat it because they have a large quantity of these sugars in different products we eat every day. Candy bars, pastries. So if we're eating a lot of simple carbs, chances are you're going to have to store it. For some of us, we store it in our muscle, and for some of us, we store it in body fat. Where you store it is dictated by how active you are. The more you exercise, the more your muscles have the ability to store extra simple carbs. If we're not active, we're not exercising much, most of this extra simple carbs is stored as body fat. Okay. So let's backtrack a moment. Two types of carbs. Simple carbs, going fast, has the potential to store if we don't burn it off as exercise, as energy. Complex carb goes in slow, gives us a long-lasting form of energy. Now I'm going to ask you, I'm going to actually exit the thing. I'm going to go to the chat room. I'm going to ask you guys to type in the chat room one or more, you can do more, some examples of simple carbohydrates that you eat. And it could be even in the last 2 days. What kind of foods did you eat that had simple carbs in them the last couple days? Type it in the chat room. Okay. That is correct, Journey. Thank you. Well, what did you get at Jimmy John's? That would be the question.
I just got a regular turkey sandwich.
So we haven't talked about whole grain versus processed grain yet. And Keon wrote Texas toast. So we would originally think that a grain should be complex because it's called a grain, and we make bread out of grain. But the problem with this is there's something called processed grain versus whole grain. The whole grain is a complex carbohydrate. If they change that whole grain into something like white bread, white rice, white pasta, that's called a processed grain now. A processed grain acts just like a simple carbohydrate. Processed grains act just like simple carbohydrates. Whole grains act like complex carbs. And I'll give you a couple images to differentiate that in a moment. But let me see what else is going in the chat room here. So apples definitely have simple carbs. The croissant and the bread, it acts like a simple carbohydrate. It acts just like sucrose. White bread acts just like sugar does when we eat it. Bananas have simple carb. Berry smoothie has simple carb. The sweetener in tea would be simple carb. Oranges, fruit juice. The bagel acts like a simple carb. Okay, so in all reality, I would say yes. If you wrote bread or bagel, it's just like a simple carbohydrate. Blueberries, granola bars might have a little bit of both. Believe it or not, a granola bar could have like complex, it could have oats in it, it could have complex wheat in it, but it also probably has sugar. So some foods like granola bar or your cereal is a great example. It's a combination of complex and simple sugars because the granola bar might have the whole grain, but also sucrose. Cereals might have whole grain, but also sucrose. So you got that. Let's talk then a minute. So let me kind of summarize here. A simple carb, and I'm doing this in the chat room. Examples of simple carb: fruit, dairy, sugar, or anything made with sugar. It could be syrup. I think I spelled syrup wrong. Syrup, or any really type of sugar, which would include that high fructose corn syrup and things like that. So when we talk about simple carbs, think fruit, dairy, and different sugary things. Okay, type some examples, class, of complex carbs. Oh, alcohol. Alcohol does have simple carbohydrates in it. So if I was to say a beer would have a combination of alcohol and sugar, which would be that maltose. So any kind of alcoholic beverage, if it's beer, wine, it's going to have a combo of what we can call alcohol and simple sugar. The alcohol has 7 calories per gram, so it's a lot. Alcohol has a lot of calories. But alcohol is not a nutrient, it's a drug. It does have calories. So any kind of beer, you drink these hard ciders, it's going to have sugar and it's going to have alcohol in it. Okay, good point to bring that up now. Let's talk about complex carbs. List some foods you eat that you think has complex carbohydrates in them. Okay, so far, I see oatmeal and potatoes are correct. Now the pasta, I'd have to really look at that and see if it's whole grain pasta or if it was a processed white pasta. And you'll understand that in about 5 minutes. I'll show you the difference between whole grain and processed pasta. Cake is probably simple carbohydrate. Rice, Melissa, rice is the same story. It could be whole grain, but sometimes people process it as well, and then it becomes acting more like a simple. PB&J, Keon, let's see. Peanut butter. What is peanut butter? It has peanuts and sugar in it. So peanut butter would have a little bit of simple carb if it was added. But then the peanut itself would have some complex carb. The bread, if it's white bread, it's really a simple carb. White bread is really simple carb. And then the jelly is simple carb, Keon. All jelly it's not going to have the complex in it. It's all simple. So anything that we make with sugar, think of it as simple carb. And we certainly make jelly with sugar. And I do see a word here down here, fish or tuna. That's protein. Fish or tuna really doesn't have much carbohydrate, maybe a small amount, but it's really protein. When I think of complex carbs, I'm thinking of two categories, whole grains and vegetables. Also, the fiber is a complex carb, and fiber can be found in whole grain, vegetable, but also fruit, and I mentioned this, fruit, beans, nuts, seeds. So when I think of complex carbs, I traditionally think of whole grain and vegetable. I also think of anything that has fiber in it. So fruit has fiber, which is complex, but fructose, which is simple. So fruit's one of those combo foods. Very good to eat. The reason we consider fruit a good food is because it's very high in fiber, vitamins, and minerals. Okay? Anything that's high in fiber, you're going to want to consume. And the categories of foods high in fiber are fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. Things that are very low in fiber, white bread, white pasta, white rice, candies, bakery, very little fiber, if any. So think simple carbs, sugar, fruit, dairy. Write that down, helps you. Simple carbs, sugars, things made with sugar, fruit, and dairy. Complex carbs, whole grains, vegetables, and anything with fiber. Okay? Before we leave today, we have one more thing I need to talk to you about, and that's the difference between a whole grain and a processed grain. You got a question? I just got out of the chat room. Could you just verbally say your question?
So complex carbs are healthier than simple carbs?
For the most part, yes. On your average day, most of what we want to consume is complex carbs, which is whole grain and vegetable, with a little bit of simple, which would be like fruit and dairy. So maybe 50% of the diet, 40% of the diet should be complex. 10 to 20% could be simple. Okay. Now,
I got those mixed up.
did I say something wrong?
No, I'm just saying I thank you for the clarification.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Now, there are situations when you should get simple carbs. If you've gone a long period of time without eating and you need energy quick, go for a simple carb. If my kids are out playing and I know they were outside playing 2-3 hours and they look like they're ready to faint, I give them a glass of milk. I give them grapes. I give them, so a healthier version of the simple carb. I give them a banana. Those are great, like post-workout meals, even pre-game meals, to give them quick energy so they can use it right away. You're playing basketball at halftime. Get a simple carb because we want the energy quick. So there are times we need simple carbs. But if you're like for me, I'm probably not leaving the house today. I'm kind of walking a little, talking a little. You know what? I don't need quick energy. I need energy that's going to last all day. Okay? And that would be complex. Let me tell you a bit about these grains. When the plant is grown, and you saw the image at the beginning of class, it looked like, you know, a corn plant, a wheat plant. It's got leaves and stems and things like that. We call those things whole grains. Okay? What comes off of them oftentimes are these little kind of seed things. Maybe you want to call it just a grain. This could be a wheat grain. It could be oats. It could be corn. It could be barley, quinoa, anything. When it's whole, picked right off the plant, it has three parts. It has bran, flour, and germ. Three parts. The bran is the outer covering. This is where the fiber is. Think of it as a hard outer shell. Like in a piece of corn, it's that hard, really tough thing that doesn't kind of break apart. If you were to eat the oats, it's a hard outer covering of the oat. In quinoa, same thing. It's really hard. It protects the seed. It protects the grain. And that's really the fiber, that outer covering. Bran is fiber. Then we have this white part in the middle called flour that has 4 calories per gram. And then we have this center part of a whole grain is called the germ. This is so important and it's microscopic. It's like the size of a pin. The germ contains healthy fat, vitamins, and minerals. And it's important to know that the germ has those nutrients. When we eat this whole grain, it is absolutely healthy for you. You're getting bran, flour, and germ. You're getting fiber, healthy fats, vitamins, and minerals in this little germ. Perfect. This is what your body wants for energy. Here's another picture of it. We've got the outer bran, which is fiber. We have something called flour. On this image, it's called endosperm. And we have this healthy germ. Within the germ, it's still a carbohydrate, but within it, it does hold about 1 gram of a healthy fat and some vitamins and minerals. Now, we want to eat it looking like this. But what happens is people like Hostess and Betty Crocker and Hershey's, they take this healthy grain, they take the bran and throw it in the garbage, they take the germ and throw it in the garbage, and they only make things with the flour, with white flour, with this endosperm. This is how you get white bread, white pasta, white rice. It's only the flour. The bran and germ are removed and thrown in the garbage. That's a processed grain. A processed grain is when you have something only made from flour. Okay, only made from this flour. Bran and germ are thrown in the garbage. Now, does anyone know why they throw the bran and germ in the garbage? We changed it from a whole grain to a processed grain by throwing the bran and the germ away. Why does that happen? Why would you get rid of the most healthy part?
I don't know. That's sad.
It is bad. It's shocking the first time you hear it. Now, what I could do is I could actually grind up this whole grain and include the bran and germ and grind that up and make a whole grain flour. You ever seen like a coffee grinder? You put the bean in, you grind it up, it comes out, you ground coffee. You could do that with this oat seed, wheat seed. The bran and germ would still be there. We grind it up, we can make something with it. But what the companies like Kraft and General Mills do, they throw out the bran and germ. They only use flour. The primary reason is the flour will last longer and they're going to be able to make more money off the product if they only use flour. The germ does deteriorate. Another word might be call it rotten. It turns rotten. It spoils quickly. So if I make a product with a whole grain in it, it's only going to last a month or two before it spoils. If I make a product with only flour, that product could probably last 2-3 years before it spoils. So I could make white rice and literally it will not spoil probably for 10 years. I could make white pasta. It will not spoil because it's only flour. What spoils is the germ. And that's why some of these companies throw it in the garbage, okay? The bran, some people think it's tough, right? It's harder to chew. You know, it's harder to break through all this fiber. If it's just made from flour, it's just white bread, right? Easy, eat it, swallow it, gone. But what the problem is, and I'll end class because I know, oh no, we have 10 more minutes, right? Yeah, we have 10 more minutes. Good. I thought I was going to have to be rushed here. But what happens is the primary health difference between a whole grain and a processed grain is huge. When your brain, when your brain knows that there is germ and bran in your body, the appetite is shut off, and you're not hungry. You stop eating. If you do not get this fiber, bran, you don't get fiber, you don't get this healthy germ, your appetite never shuts off because all you're getting is flour. Flour has nothing but calories. It has no vitamins, has no minerals, has no healthy fat. Flour is just calories. Your brain isn't necessarily only looking for calories. It's looking for nutrients that helps it survive. It's looking for fiber. It's looking for vitamins. It's looking for minerals. Your brain is looking for healthy fat. When your brain gets those healthy nutrients, the appetite shuts off. You don't want to eat anymore. If all you're getting is flour, which is this endosperm, your appetite will stay high no matter how much quantity you eat. You can eat a whole loaf of white bread and still be hungry. You can eat a whole package of white pasta and still be hungry. When your body finally gets the bran and germ, it's like, okay, I'm full. I can stop eating now. So when we're eating processed grains, like cakes, Jimmy John's, white bread, white rice, white pasta, we're putting in a quantity of calories, but we're not shutting off the appetite, unfortunately. And that's why people overeat. There's one other issue with these grains. They act like a simple carbohydrate. When we process the grain, we throw out the bran and germ, we only eat the flour. That flour acts just like sucrose, just like a simple carbohydrate. So we eat it, and it raises our blood glucose immediately, just like sugar or sucrose does. As soon as you put it in, your blood glucose will spike. You either got to use that off immediately by activity, or it will be stored. It'll be stored as muscle glycogen or fat. Okay, and that's the blood glucose story. If you eat a lot of processed grains, you're kind of setting yourself up to put on body fat. If you eat the whole grain, it's really hard to overeat a whole grain. Okay, here's some pictures of whole grains. It's hard to overeat a whole grain because your appetite shuts down and says, stop eating. I got fiber, I've got vitamins and minerals, I've got healthy fat, we don't need it anymore. If you ate whole grain bread, whole grain pasta, wild rice, brown rice, these are oats, this is wheat, this is probably barley or quinoa, your brain will say, I got enough, stop eating. You're going to feel full right away. So it's hard to overeat. Here are some items made from whole grain. See, you could make bread with a whole grain. You could make pasta with a whole grain. And here's a bowl of oatmeal. That's a whole grain. The reason companies throw out the bran and germ is because it spoils so quick. They can only sell this loaf of bread for a couple of days. They can sell a loaf of white bread for probably 2 weeks, no problem. They can sell a package of processed white pasta for 2 years. The whole grain pasta will spoil quickly. Or in a couple of weeks, it'll be spoiled. So it's really about money with these companies. They've conned the American people into eating processed grains because it's cheaper, and that's really why it's all over the grocery store. When you walk in the grocery store, many of the breads, rice, pastas, bakery, many of them are processed grains because it makes the company money. It's cheap for them to make it, and they'll load up on their monetary benefits from you guys buying processed grain. Somebody clicked that they might have a question. I'll just take a break. What was your question, guys?
That was me. So basically, a lot of these food industry companies, they have the possibility to give us whole grain foods. They just choose not to because that would make us full, and
Right.
capitalism. Wow.
And they will lose some of their, yeah, it'll make us full, right? If you made a sandwich with whole wheat bread, you could probably use two pieces of whole wheat bread, put a little bit of lunch meat, you eat it, you're going to feel full. You do the white bread, you're going to be like, oh, I think I can eat another one. I mean, Keon, how many sandwiches of PB&J could you eat? I know you're an athlete, so I'm kind of picking on you here, but I know that my kids could probably eat 2-3 sandwiches of PB&J with processed bread.
Yeah, I
Right?
eat like probably like 5 sandwiches. I used to eat a lot with some milk.
And that's the thing, guys. If we ate the whole grains, we wouldn't eat as much. We wouldn't buy as much. But if we're starting with the processed grains, I know that when I cook a white pasta for my family, I almost have to make 2 pounds of pasta, 2 packages, because they're eating it and that appetite isn't shutting off. So what I encourage people to do is, it's hard to only eat whole grain. It's hard because we are surrounded by processed. But we're looking at the screen right now. Can we pick 1 or 2 of these per day? And we're looking at words on ingredient list. If you're reading an ingredient list, we're looking for words that say whole wheat, whole barley, whole millet, whole rye. Maybe it says cracked wheat, rolled oats. We're looking for these words on the ingredient list, or we're literally buying a seed that looks directly like this. And that's a whole grain. It's hard to identify it.
Professor, for like bread, for example, can a company say they're whole grain without like actually being, or is that picture that you're posting right now that would indicate that?
Well, they should not lie to you, but some may say this is healthy. But if we read the ingredient list, they can't lie on the ingredient list. They might try to lie to you on the front of the package. But in the ingredient list, we're looking for the words whole or rolled. They can't lie on that ingredient list. How to identify the differences? And I'm going to show you a quick video. If this stamp is on the bread, pasta, maybe crackers or cereal, then it's a whole grain. 100%, everything in it is a whole grain. If it doesn't say 100%, I usually think about half that product is whole grain. So we're looking for the stamp, or guys, if it says flour, it's processed. Anywhere in the ingredient list, if it says flour, and they will lie to you, they'll say this is whole grain flour. That's processed. It was a whole grain, but now it's flour. So this is the key giveaway. If you're looking on the back of breads, or like bagels, muffins, we're trying to find this word. If it says flour, it's processed. Okay. Now here are some examples of healthy, maybe inexpensive whole grains: oatmeal, brown rice, whole wheat bread, whole wheat pasta, barley. I just got a pound for 99 cents. I throw it in my soup. It looks like a little pasta, but it's called barley. So try to get like 1 or 2 per day. And I'm going to give it to you in simple words. I'm going to try to find my video really quickly here. While I'm going to find my video. Let me do something. Somebody have a question while I'm trying to pull up my video?
No, I was just typing. I'm trying so hard to like lentils and quinoa. It's never been my favorite, but it definitely has a lot of nutritional benefit.
Yes. The quinoa, it is a little bit more expensive than some other types of whole grain, but quinoa is very healthy, as is the lentils. if you guys want to, this is what quinoa looks like. I don't know if everybody's ever seen it. It looks like I mean, it kind of resembles pasta, but it's really tiny. And you can eat it just like you eat pasta or rice.
It looks
That's what. Is there another question? I'm going to show you this video. I promise it's about a minute long. Then I'm going to let you guys go if you have to go. I will stick around for questions, though. If you have questions, I will stick around. But watch this 1 minute video.
Has finally made it. What are grains? Grains are small, hard, dry seeds. There are many different grains, such as barley, oats, and quinoa. Corn, rice, and wheat account for most of the world's grain harvest. Rice and most wheat are consumed directly as food. Corn is largely used for livestock and poultry feed. Almost half of the world's grain is produced in just 3 countries: China, the US, and India. Grains can be divided into 2 subcategories: whole grains and refined grains. Whole grains contain the entire grain kernel, which includes the bran, the endosperm, and the germ. Refined grains refers to grain products that have been modified from their natural composition. This usually involves the removal of the bran and germ. The nutritional difference between whole grains and refined grains is dramatic. The bran is typically high in fiber, protein, and B vitamins. The germ is also high in protein, fiber, and B vitamins, and it contains healthy polyunsaturated fats. While refined grains are stripped of the bran and germ, they're usually enriched with some of the nutrients that have been lost. But the nutrients that are replaced are nowhere near the original amount, and many times the body doesn't use or process these nutrients the way it does when the food was in its original form. Consumption of whole grains has been linked with a decreased risk of cardiovascular disease. In some people, it has lowered triglyceride levels and has shown an inverse relationship to hypertension and obesity when compared to refined grain consumption. Whole grains also lower spikes in blood sugar, and because of their high fiber content, can aid in digestion. Some foods made from grains include bread, pasta, oatmeal, breakfast cereals, and tortillas. Grains are an essential part of any balanced diet, so make sure the grains you are consuming are whole grains.
When he mentions tortillas, guys, that's corn tortillas, not the flour. The flour is processed. But that's a good example of how you can make a switch and really change the health content of your food. A flour tortilla is just the endosperm, is just the flour, no bran, no germ. The corn tortilla has the germ and the bran. Okay. Now, we did run out of time. I'm going to stick around if you have questions. If some of you have to go, then you could leave. If you came in after attendance, I do want you to raise your hand real quick. I'll finish taking attendance, and then I will stick around if you guys got questions, okay? Let me finish attendance, and then if you have questions, I'll stick around. We will review all of this Thursday and then talk about the blood glucose story. Okay, Odalis, I have you. Journey, I have you. Keon, I have you. Andres, I have you. And Michael, I have you. You guys are free to go.
Thank you. Have a good, see you Wednesday or Thursday.
Thursday. Yeah, we'll review on Thursday. Everything we talked about and then the blood glucose story.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Hi, I just wanted to make sure I got everything covered as far as the.
Hello?
Hello?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you now. You broke out for a minute.
Sorry. Yeah, I just want to make sure I understood like the purpose of making refined grains.
Sure.
So is it cheaper to process as well, or